So, you really think you'd survive? You, with your protein shake and air-conditioned gym, watching Gladiator on your flat screen and fantasizing about wielding a sword like a demigod? You think it's about strength? About guts? About honor? That's adorable. No, this isn't honor. It's horror. You weren't born a hero. You were bought as meat. Welcome to Rome, where the crowd doesn't chant your name because they love you. They chant it because they want to see if your intestines fall out on the next hit. Congratulations, you've just been shackled. Not metaphorically, literally, shackled. Iron, rusted, cold, bolted around your ankles, your neck, your wrists. You don't feel strong. You feel weak. Weak from the hunger. Weak from the transport. 4 days in a cart stuffed with groaning bodies, one of whom definitely died halfway through, and no one bothered to remove. Weak from the fact that you're now property. The label slave isn't just a word anymore. It's your role, your identity, your new name. If you're lucky, they call you by a nickname. If you're not, they don't call you at all. They kick you. You arrive at the ludus, the training school. Sounds noble, right? A place to forge warriors? Try a prison disguised as a barracks. Stone walls, iron gates, and the smell. Gods, the smell. Sweat, rot, blood, desperation. It's a scent you'll grow used to, like how you grow used to hunger. Speaking of food, don't expect roast boar and wine. You get beans, sometimes barley mash. Not because they care about your nutrition, but because it keeps you alive just long enough to die entertainingly. You want to leave? Funny. The only way out is in pieces or in legend. Your first night, you don't sleep. Not just because the straw mat is alive with lice, or because the guy next to you snores like a wounded bull. You don't sleep because you're listening. Listening to the sounds of the men who've been here longer. Their coughs, their pacing, the quiet sobs muffled under their breath, the occasional scream. Sometimes they don't scream at all. They just stop making noise. Those are the ones to worry about. Morning. The lanista, your trainer, owner, torturer, wakes you with a whip across the feet. You stand. You don't ask questions. You don't speak unless told. You move, like cattle, out to the training yard. It's not training. It's preparation for death. First, they test you. They want to see what you are. Are you muscle? Are you speed? Are you soft? They watch how you fall. They listen to how you breathe. They measure you not by potential, but by how dramatic your death might look. You're handed a wooden sword. Not to fight with. To get beaten with. You learn footwork. You learn formations. You learn that your back is not yours anymore. It belongs to the lash. You bleed daily. And it's never from the enemy. It's from the instructors, the other gladiators, the ropes, the stones, the sun, the inside of your own skull. And then, one day, you're taken aside. A man in a toga looks you over like a horse. He asks your name. You tell him. He renames you. Something catchy, something cruel, something the crowd will remember when they're betting on your odds. You're not a person anymore. You're a product. And then they brand you. Fire, flesh, smoke. The mark says property. The pain says forever. Time passes. You survive the training. Others don't. Some collapse from heat stroke. Some slip on sweat and snap a leg. One man impaled himself during practice. They left his body there for hours, a warning. The games are coming. And when the day finally arrives, you don't get to prepare. You wake up and you're told, today. No ceremony, no prayer, just today. You're handed your gear. If you're a murmillo, it's a heavy shield and a gladius. If you're a retiarius, it's a net and a trident. If you're unlucky, it's nothing but a loincloth and a wooden stick. You ask who you're fighting. They laugh, as if it matters. The Colosseum. The sand is red before you even enter. The crowd is roaring. Not for you. Not yet. They don't know you. But they will. And not because you'll win, but because you'll bleed. The sun is blinding. The heat unbearable. You're led in with 3 others. 2 fall before you even lift your arm. The third, he knows what he's doing. You don't. You raise your shield. It's too heavy. You swing. Too slow. His blade cuts your shoulder. Shallow, but it burns. The crowd cheers. You realize they're not cheering for your survival. They're cheering for your pain. You survive. Not because you win. Because you make it interesting. Blood sprays. Sand flies. Your opponent dies gasping. You don't even remember the final blow. It just happens. Like blinking. And then you're standing over a corpse, chest heaving, vision darkening. You don't feel victory. You feel less human. They drag you out, stitch your wound with thread thick as horsehair. No anesthesia, no clean water, just hot wine and rough hands. You vomit from the pain. They laugh. You'll get used to it. You don't. Days pass. Your name is on posters. You have fans. Women scream for you. Children carve your name into walls. Men bet fortunes on whether you'll die in the 2nd or 3rd bout. You feel powerful. But it's not power. It's performance. You're not respected. You're consumed. You're invited to feast with nobles, not as an equal, as entertainment. They poke your scars. They ask if you've ever killed with a single stroke. They ask if you dream of freedom. You lie. You say, yes. You say, I'm honored. Inside, you wonder how many fights until your luck ends. One day, you're paired with a beast. Not metaphorically. A real one. A lion. Or a bear. Or something brought in from across the sea with too many teeth and no fear of death. The gate opens. It snarls. You freeze. Everyone watches. You don't want to fight. But you don't have a choice. The only thing more terrifying than the beast is disappointing the crowd. You survive. Barely. The beast doesn't. You're awarded a crown of leaves. Not gold, not freedom. Leaves. They rot within a day. Like everything else. You become known. A veteran. A crowd favorite. You get better armor. Better food. Your cell is cleaned once a week instead of once a month. You're promoted. Given a younger gladiator to train. He asks you how to stay alive. You say, stay lucky. You think of escape, of rebellion, of refusing to fight. Others have tried. They vanished. No one speaks of them. You learn to shut that part of your mind off, to kill without flinching, to stare into eyes and see nothing. You become a ghost wrapped in muscle. And then, the final fight. Maybe they offer you your freedom. Maybe they lie. Maybe you fight another legend, or a condemned criminal, or a dozen men at once. You fight, you bleed, you fall, you rise. The crowd stands. The emperor raises his thumb. Up? Down? You don't care anymore. You close your eyes. And then, silence. Maybe you die. Maybe you live. Maybe your name becomes legend. Maybe it fades by sunset. But one thing is certain. You were never a warrior. You were a spectacle. And the arena never forgets what it takes. Not strength, not courage, but the willingness to become a monster for their applause. So, you really think you'd survive? So you think you'd choose this life? No. This life chooses you. And it doesn't ask politely. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be a gladiator. You didn't look at your career options and circle human bullseye on a parchment. You didn't enlist or sign up or shake hands with a recruiter. You were thrown into the machine, shackled, numbered, forgotten. You didn't walk into the arena. You were dragged into it. And by then you weren't even a man anymore. You were meat, branded, owned, processed for violence. Let's rewind. Who became a gladiator? Not heroes, not athletes, not brave volunteers in shining armor. No, Rome didn't need volunteers. It had prisoners, it had slaves, it had debtors and deserters, men who fought against Rome and lost, men who couldn't pay what they owed, men who stole bread, men who said the wrong thing about the emperor's latest statue, men who simply stood in the wrong place when the guards were bored. And then, lunatics, the ones who volunteered, the ones who saw glory in blood, the ones who mistook death for destiny. They were rare and worshipped like mad prophets because the rest of you were bought. The flesh market didn't hide. It wasn't tucked away in alleys. It stood in broad daylight. A place where you, with your bruised face and broken spirit, stood naked before a crowd of buyers. A lanista, the trainer/slave master, would inspect you like cattle. Flex. Bite this. Walk. Lift. Turn around. He wasn't judging your soul. He was judging your resale value. Big muscles? Good. Missing teeth? Doesn't matter. Scars? Even better. The crowd loves a backstory. You had no say. You were purchased, like grain or lumber or a cart, and the moment that coin clinked into a Roman palm, your old life vanished. Your name? Gone. Your citizenship? Erased. Your past? Irrelevant. You were assigned a new identity, usually a single name, one syllable, easy to chant between sips of wine and bites of boar. You were given a cell, a bowl of gruel, and a schedule that consisted of one thing: preparing to die interestingly. Inside the ludus, the training school, dehumanization wasn't a process. It was a foundation. You were not a man learning to fight. You were a product being sharpened. Your screams were part of the daily soundtrack. So were the lashes. So were the deaths. Every day was a rehearsal for the moment you'd be fed to the mob, not to be punished, but to perform. This wasn't the army. This wasn't for Rome's glory. This was for Rome's appetite. You trained with wooden swords until your muscles screamed. You ran in sand until your knees buckled. You got water if you earned it. You got sleep if you didn't vomit from the pain. Injuries didn't get sympathy. They got salt. Infection didn't get medicine. It got cauterized. You learned that your owner didn't care about your life. He cared about your draw. Would the crowd scream when you bled? Would they bet when your knee shattered? Would they cheer when your head hit the sand? The best of you, the most brutal, the most unfeeling, the most hopeless, became investments. You got better food, a nickname, a cleaner chain. You weren't free. You were just worth more. Like a prized horse before a race. And when you were brought out in front of the crowd, greased and bronzed like a statue, people pointed. They shouted. They placed bets on whether your death would take seconds or minutes. You were Rome's reality show, a living, bleeding spectacle. The crowd never thought of you as a person. They didn't care where you were born. They didn't care who you loved. They didn't care if you cried in the dark. You were an object, a function, a role in the script of their day. You existed to make them feel something between boredom and ecstasy. That's it. Slavery, but louder. Servitude with music. Suffering with applause. And make no mistake, the arena didn't clean up your pain. It painted it gold. It made it myth. They sold statues of your face in the market, painted your final blow on clay pots, wrote your name, not yours, your given name, into cheap poetry recited in smoky taverns. You were famous, but not loved, admired, but not respected, remembered, but never known. And then, one day, your owner decides your arc is complete. Maybe your draw fades. Maybe your body gives out. Maybe a richer fighter shows up, younger, shinier, faster. You're matched against him, not for your win, for your exit. You die. People cheer. The crowd moves on. The sand is swept clean. A new name is called. And you become part of the dust. So you think you'd become a gladiator? No, you'd become merchandise. And Rome always knew how to turn a man into meat, with flair, with force, and with a front row seat for the slaughter. Welcome to the Ludus. Not a school. Don't even call it that. This isn't where you learn to be a gladiator. This is where you're conditioned, like a dog, like a draft animal, like raw meat cured in salt and silence until it's fit for slaughter. Think of it as a human cage with just enough food to keep your pulse going and just enough space to keep you from going insane, although most of you go mad anyway. It begins before dawn. The sky is still black, the air cold and thick with the scent of urine, mildew, and sour wine. You're woken not by a bell, but by the bark of an order or the crack of a whip. No time for prayer, no time for thought. You stand because you're told. You move because you must. If you hesitate, you get dragged. If you speak, you get struck. The rules are simple. Obey, perform, survive. In that order. You shuffle out onto the sand yard with the others. Dozens of hollowed men who no longer flinch at pain, who no longer cry when bones break, who no longer ask what day it is. Because days don't matter here. Only drills do. You're handed a weapon, but not a real one. Not yet. Wooden swords, heavier than iron, blunter than your fare. Not meant to teach technique, but to break your arms, your wrists, your will. You swing it over and over until your shoulders lock, until your breath rattles in your chest, until your fingers go numb and you start wishing someone would end it now. They don't. You keep swinging. Footwork, footwork, footwork. Stab, step, lunge, block. Again, again, again. It's not about skill. It's about discipline. They drill you until your legs shake and your vision doubles, until the sand beneath you is soaked with the sweat of 100 doomed men, until your body stops responding and your mind stops resisting, until you learn that every step, every strike, every twitch of a finger has consequences. Hierarchy is God here. At the top is the lanista, your owner, your keeper, your judge and executioner. He bought you. He can sell you or snap your neck for sport. Below him, the doctors, your drill masters, veterans, survivors, monsters in their own right, men who've seen the inside of an arena and lived to sneer at the rest of you. They bark orders, swing clubs, break jaws. They teach through pain and reward, through absence of it. Beneath them, maybe, is a medicus, a healer, if your ludus can afford one. If not, then hope you don't bleed too fast or fracture something important, or hope you die quick. Surveillance never ends. Every breath is watched. Every grimace catalogued. They're looking for weakness, cowardice, insolence, the ones who twitch when the lash is raised, the ones who pray too loudly at night, the ones who ask questions. These men disappear. Not dramatically, quietly. One night, their straw mat is empty. No blood, no body. just absence and silence. Punishment is constant. Disobedience earns you a beating. Laziness earns you starvation. Fighting outside drills, shackles, biting a guard, broken teeth, but worst of all, failure. If you mess up in a drill, if you block late, if your grip falters, they make an example of you. Crack. A club to the ribs, a knee to the spine, a wooden sword slammed into your face. You don't get a moment to recover. You bleed into your training because pain is part of the process. Your body? Replaceable. Your spirit? Optional. They wear you down in layers. First your strength, then your pride, then your identity. They shave your head, strip your clothes, rename you. You are no longer Titus or Darius or Albinus. You are axe, wolf, dust. Something simple, something marketable. You belong to the crowd now. Your name is theirs to chant or to forget. Evenings are the cruelest. The drills end. The pain doesn't. You return to your cell, a stone closet stinking of old wounds and mold. You sit in the dark. You hear others breathing, moaning, sometimes praying, sometimes begging, sometimes nothing at all. That's when it gets dangerous, when the silence grows too heavy. Some men start talking to ghosts. Some claw at their walls. Some choke themselves on their own hands just to feel something they chose. And what do you get for surviving the day? For enduring the drills, the bruises, the lash? You get a bowl of bean mash. Cold, sour, crawling with something. You eat it anyway. Not because you're hungry, but because your body has to last. Because you've earned one more night of breath. One more chance to see daylight, even if it's through the bars. Here's the truth they don't tell the crowd. The arena doesn't start in the Colosseum. It starts here, in the ludus. This is where you die, slowly, painfully, deliberately, until what rises in the arena is no longer a man, but a monster. So, still think it's just a school? Then step into the yard, pick up the wooden sword, and swing until you forget why you ever stopped. Death by design, gladiator classes and weapons. So you think you get to choose your weapon? That's cute. This isn't a game. This is Rome, and you're about to be cast in your final role. You don't pick your class. You don't pick your gear. You don't walk into the ludus and say, I'm feeling like a sword guy today. No, you get assigned, cast like a prop in Rome's most grotesque theatre, because that's what this is. A stage soaked in blood and applause, where every fight is a performance, every scream part of the score, and every death, scripted if not rehearsed. You are not a warrior. You are a character. Your weapon is your costume, your fate already foreshadowed. And in this grand open-air nightmare, there are roles to play. Murmillo, the heavy hitter, the walking wall, the tank with a pulse. If you're big, really big, if your shoulders touch door frames, and your neck looks like it ate another neck, you're going to be cast as a Murmillo. Congratulations. You're the battering ram, the human anvil. The audience isn't looking to see if you're fast. They want to hear the ground groan when you move. You wear a helmet the size of a barrel, no peripheral vision, barely any air, and a thick crest that says, "This guy can't hear you scream." You carry a scutum, a massive rectangular shield, and a gladius, a short stabbing sword designed to slide neatly between ribs. You are a wall with a blade. You fight with slow, terrifying inevitability. Your job? Advance, absorb, punish. The crowd doesn't love you for elegance. They love you for brutality. When you strike, it's like a statue came to life to murder someone. And when you fall, you don't fall quietly. You collapse like a building. Hard, slow, unforgettable. Retiarius, the net man, the nimble one, the underdog with style. Light, fast, barely armored. You're a retiarius, the weird one. The crowd doesn't know whether to cheer for you or laugh at you. No helmet, no shield, just a shoulder guard, a weighted net, and a trident as tall as your regrets. You look like you walked out of the fish market by mistake. But don't be fooled. You're not comic relief. You're the most dangerous thing in the arena, if you live long enough. Your job? Dance, dodge, taunt. You're a mosquito with a harpoon. You twirl the net, cast it wide, entangle the oaf in front of you, and strike while he's blind and boiling inside his helmet. But one mistake, one slip, and it's over. You don't get second chances when you're basically naked. You live on instinct and showmanship. You win by making death look like ballet. The crowd loves you because you're dramatic. You make fear look graceful. You don't kill, you humiliate. And when you die, you do it poetically. Thraex, Thracian, the agile killer, the blade dancer, the wild card. You're small, wiry, vicious, a little too twitchy for a Mamilio, a little too angry for a Retiarius. You become a Thraex, named after the Thracian warriors, those fierce outsiders Rome couldn't quite conquer. You carry a curved sica, a blade made for hooking beneath armor, and a small rectangular shield called a palmula. You wear greaves that come up to your thighs, and a stylized helmet with a crest shaped like a griffin. Mythology meets murder. Your job? Confuse, distract, shred. You don't block, you evade, you don't stab, you carve. You don't walk, you bounce, pivot, spin. You strike from odd angles. You leap into range, land a blow, vanish again. You are pain in motion. The Mamilio dreads you. The Retiarius envies you. The crowd? They think you're a demon with footwork. You don't win clean, you win clever. And if you die, it's because the script needed a twist. Circuiter, the chaser. The silent executioner. The shadow of the net man. Designed specifically to kill Retiarii. That's it. That's your whole arc. You are death sent in pursuit. Your helmet is smooth. No crest, no decoration, just two tiny eye holes like a predator peering out of a tomb. So your vision's terrible. Your breathing? Worse. But that doesn't matter, because all you need to do is keep moving forward. You carry a gladius and a scutum, like a murmillo, but your whole design is streamlined. No flares, no distractions. You are a walking blade. Your fight is the most theatrical of all, the classic matchup. Net versus steel, speed versus strength. The Retiarius dances. You lumber, he taunts. You close in. The crowd holds their breath because they've seen this match 100 times, but never this one. Never this blood. Never this ending. You don't play for sympathy. You play for suspense. You are the nightmare that doesn't speak, just breathes heavily and keeps coming. Hoplomachus, the spear-bearer, the false Greek, the arena's ghost from the east. You don't look Roman. You're not meant to. You're a living echo of Greece, the enemy, the relic, the pageantry of a past empire Rome consumed and recreated for sport. You wear greaves on both legs, a tall feathered helmet, and a round shield. Your weapon? A short spear and a dagger, one for stabbing from range, the other for finishing the job. You fight like a soldier in a reenactment, stylized, precise, deliberate. The crowd watches you like a dance. You're paired against Mamillios or Thraexes. They want to see myth clash with might. They want to see what happens when strategy meets fury. You're elegant, mysterious, the quietest of the classes. But don't mistake quiet for weak. Your spear pierces fast, and your dagger speaks second, always fatally. You don't flail, you don't shout. You whisper death into the crowd's ears. Gladiator combat wasn't sport. It was storytelling. Each pairing wasn't random. It was casting. The crowd didn't just want blood. They wanted narrative. Mamilio versus Retiarius. Brute versus Trickster. Secutor versus Retiarius. Hunter versus Prey. Thraex versus Mamilio. Chaos versus Control. Hoplomachus versus Thraex. East versus East. Every match was a myth in motion. A ritual of death dressed as entertainment. Your opponent wasn't just a threat. He was your foil, your opposite, your mirror. He was the other side of the coin the gods had flipped for the crowd's amusement. And the outcome? It wasn't always fair. It wasn't always clean. But it was always dramatic. The armor wasn't protection. It was theater. The helmets were masks. The weapons, props. You didn't win because you were the best. You won because your death wasn't scheduled yet. Or because the crowd liked your scream better than his. And when you died, because you will die, the crowd didn't remember your name. They remembered the class, the role, the style. That one Thraex, the Retiarius who slipped, the Mamilio who bled like a fountain. So pick your role. No, wait, you don't get to. Just remember, in the arena, you're not a fighter. You're a fable. And fables always end in blood. So you thought it was a fight? You thought it was a match? No. This is not an arena. This is a ritualistic killing ground. And you're the centerpiece. Step into the Colosseum, not through the front gates, where the crowd swarms and vendors shout, where pickpockets pray and children beg for figs. No, through the side. The narrow corridor that smells like sweat, rust, and whatever died last night. You don't walk in. You're herded, like cattle, like tribute, like the disposable man you are. The moment your foot hits the sand, you stop being human. This isn't a stadium. This is a blood temple, a holy site to death. Rome didn't build this place for sport. It built it for sacrifice, yours. Above you rise the seats, 50,000 strong, tiered by power. At the top, the gods, senators in silk, their faces powdered, their fingers heavy with rings they never earned. Below them, the merchants, the veterans, the armored bureaucrats of empire. Below them, the butchers, the bakers, the stinking masses who live 5 to a room in the Subura and dream of glory. But here, everyone's equal. Rich or poor, clothed in linen or filth, they all came to see one thing. You die, and above them all, the Emperor, draped in purple, flanked by guards, perfumed and composed, sipping wine while watching your heartbeat. One twitch, one tremble. He sees it. He always sees it. Your breath belongs to him. Your blood will paint his day. The show begins before you even enter. It starts with music, not gentle, not subtle. Drums, thunderous, primal, the kind that make your chest rattle and your vision blur, the kind that say, this is not your world anymore. Horns blare, trumpets scream, the gates open, a procession of color and death floods the sand, standard bearers waving Rome's sigils, musicians pounding rhythm into madness, executioners dragging criminals already gagging on their own fear, exotic beasts, lions, leopards, bears, led in on chains so tight their fur is worn raw. Elephants stomp and trumpet, eyes wide with confusion, their tusks painted red. The crowd rises, roars, screams. The entire building shakes like a storm about to break. And you're not even out there yet. Then come the morning games. Not you. Not yet. This is the warm-up. A few executions, a few beast maulings, a few unfortunate souls thrown into pits with nothing but sticks. The crowd cheers. Not politely. Not like an audience. Like a pack of wolves that smelled blood. Children laugh. Women throw wreaths. Old men shout betting odds. The Colosseum isn't quiet. It never is. It growls, it hungers, it breathes. Then it's your turn. Your name is announced. Not your real one. Your stage name. The one they branded into your arm and printed on clay mugs. You step onto the sand and feel the heat rise through your soles. You feel eyes, tens of thousands of them, crawling over you. Judging your scars, measuring your fear, and waiting. Your opponent enters. Maybe someone you trained beside. Maybe someone you've never seen. Doesn't matter. He's not a man now. He's your script partner. And one of you is about to deliver the ending. The editor raises his hand. Not the emperor. Not yet. The games master. He gives the signal. The horns scream again. The drums pound like gods kicking at the sky. The crowd leans forward, breath held, hearts ready to explode. And then you fight. Not with strategy. Not with technique. With instinct. With panic. With everything you have and everything you've ever hated about your life. The blades clash. The sand kicks. You hear the crowd now, louder than thought. You can't tell if they're cheering for you or against you. Doesn't matter. They want a show. If your opponent bleeds, they scream with joy. If you falter, they scream for your death. If you hesitate, even for a second, they boo, they jeer, they spit, because this isn't about winning. This is about delivering death. Not the clean kind. Not the swift soldier's death you once imagined. This is operatic. This is theatrical. Your throat split open as a geyser. Your intestines unraveling in the sand. Your eye gouged with a dagger. And your scream swallowed by 50,000 mouths laughing. That's what they came for. Not skill. Not glory. Carnage. The truth is, the crowd doesn't just cheer for death. They demand it. They lust for it. And if the match is too even, too dull, too human, you have one option left. You become the death. You turn the blade on yourself. You fall dramatically. You make it look good. You die with a snarl, with a curse, with a flourish. Because if you don't, if the crowd leaves unsatisfied, the next man dies harder, slower, publicly punished not for weakness, but for boring them. And if somehow you win, you wait, you kneel, you raise your hand, you look up at the emperor. He doesn't blink, he doesn't flinch. He extends his thumb. Up, down, sideways? It changes nothing. The decision was made long ago. You die or you don't, and you live to die again tomorrow, when you are dragged from the sand, bleeding, broken, victorious or not. The crowd erupts. Not for you, for the show, for Rome, for the glorious spectacle that proves, once again, that life is cheap and entertainment is everything. So go ahead, step into the Colosseum, and feel what it's like to be the only man inside 50,000 people's favorite story, written in your blood, not just men, women, beasts and freaks. So you thought it was all men in armor and noble duels? How quaint. The arena didn't care who you were, only how loud you could make the crowd scream. Rome didn't do restraint. It didn't do limits, and it definitely didn't do ethical lines. The Colosseum wasn't just a battlefield, it was a buffet, and when blood became boring, Rome found new flavors. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were ingredients. Mixed, swapped, remixed, rebranded. Anything to keep the mob drooling. Because in the Empire's favorite theater, novelty was the main event, and cruelty was just the seasoning. Female gladiators. Glamour in chains. Yes, women fought. Not often, not regularly. But when they did, the crowd lost its mind. Emperors loved it. Not because it was progressive, but because it was scandalous, sensational. A woman with a sword? That wasn't bravery, that was spectacle. And in Rome, spectacle sold out every seat. The female gladiator, gladiatrix, wasn't an icon. She was a novelty. She wasn't respected. She was ogled, paraded, painted on vases like erotic graffiti. A woman in a tunic, greased and armed, facing down another woman while noblemen shouted bets and children laughed. And when she won, the crowd roared, not for her skill, but for the absurdity of it. And when she lost, that was even better. There were no classes for her, no official training. She got whatever armor fit, whatever weapon was free, sometimes topless, sometimes blindfolded. Because what mattered wasn't her defense, it was the drama. And when the emperor smiled from his seat and raised his thumb, she bowed just like the men. And bled just like them, too. Bestiari. The beast fighters want to die with flair? Meet the bestiarius, the poor soul sentenced to fight animals. Not a lion, not a bear. Sometimes dozens, sometimes chained, sometimes naked, sometimes on fire. They weren't just warriors. They were human sacrifices with a touch of choreography, sent into the arena with spears, knives, torches, or sometimes just their fists, and told, kill or be torn apart. Tigers from India, hippos from Egypt, rhinoceroses that crushed men by accident, bears starved for days, packs of wolves, herds of bulls with flaming horns. Sometimes they gave the beast an advantage, filed down weapons, crippled limbs, one arm tied behind the back. Sometimes they didn't give the man a weapon at all. Just a chance, just a delay, just enough time for the audience to guess how the screaming might start. And if you killed the beast, the crowd still booed, because the beast was beautiful. It was exotic. It was rare. You were just another pleb. Killing it wasn't triumph. It was theft. The grotesque. Dwarfs, cripples, and the condemned Rome was obsessed with deformity, with contrast, with the absurdity of suffering. If you were born with dwarfism, missing limbs, twisted bones, you were drafted into the horror show, not to inspire pity, to entertain. Two hunchbacks forced to duel with wooden paddles, blindfolded cripples swinging at shadows, a dwarf tied to a dog and dragged through sand while nobles wept from laughter. These weren't side acts. These were headliners. The crowd loved them because it made them feel powerful, made them feel whole, made them feel Roman. And then, the condemned. Criminals, rebels, prisoners of war. They weren't gladiators. They were props, sent into the arena with no armor, no training, no hope, told to act out stories with their lives. Theatrical murders, when myth met mutilation. You've heard of plays, tragedies, heroic tales of gods and mortals. Rome staged them too, but here's the twist. They used real blood. Prometheus chained and disemboweled by a vulture, performed by a condemned man. Real chains, real eagle, real guts. Orpheus torn apart by crazed women. Actual prisoners with knives. Hercules burned alive. No actor, just a criminal soaked in pitch. Every myth became murder with a theme. And the crowd? They loved it. They cheered harder for the accuracy. Ah, just like the legend, they'd say. as a man screamed with his liver exposed. They weren't there for the ending. They were there for the execution. Novelty and cruelty, the twin gods of the arena. You couldn't repeat a show, not in Rome, not when the empire ran on distraction. Bread and circuses, yes, but mostly the circuses. And circuses needed new tricks, different deaths, unseen spectacles. Because once the crowd had seen one man die well, the next one had to die differently. Burnings, beheadings, hangings, crucifixions, drownings in giant tanks, men sewn into animal skins and torn apart, people catapulted into walls, men forced to reenact shipwrecks in flooded arenas, drowning as fake islands sank. They invented new cruelty just to avoid boredom. Death wasn't enough. Death had to innovate, every day, every show, because the moment the crowd got bored, the entire system cracked. The emperor looked weak, the city got restless, and the only thing worse than an angry mob is a bored one. So they fed it. Women, beasts, freaks, myths, madness, everything was fair game. So you thought the arena was about men? No, the arena was about consumption, of blood, of flesh, of dignity. It was where Rome fed its worst instincts and called it culture. And when the sand turned red, when the screams turned to silence, when the corpse was dragged off stage, the crowd rose to its feet. Not in sorrow, but in satisfaction. Because cruelty in Rome wasn't the exception. It was the entertainment. So you think you've won? That you've earned something? That the gods are smiling down because the other man died first? No. All you've earned is one more night in hell. This isn't about victory. It's about duration. You survived, for now. You stumble out of the arena not to cheers but to silence. The fight's over. The crowd has moved on, already placing bets on the next pair, already laughing, drinking, stuffing their mouths with olives and goat while you bleed into the ground like garbage runoff. You drag your body past the gate, or someone drags it for you, and suddenly the sound of 50,000 roars is replaced by the low moan of the injured, the weeping of the almost dead, the hollow rasp of a man trying to breathe with half a lung. You think you're safe now? The real pain is just beginning. Your bones are cracked, maybe fractured, maybe shattered. You won't know until something bends the wrong way. You've got cuts that won't close, some deep enough to let in the kind of infection that doesn't wait around. Muscles torn, joints out of place, bruises the size of helmets, skin that bubbles from infection days later. Maybe you took a blow to the skull. Maybe you can't remember your name. That's fine. The crowd doesn't chant your name, just your title. There is no medical tent, no sterile tools, no clean sheets. You lie on stone or straw or the same blood-soaked sand from the last man who lost. The medicus, if there is one, is also the butcher. A man with thick fingers and thicker tools. He's not here to heal you. He's here to patch you. Crude stitches done with animal gut. Boiling wine poured into open wounds while 4 other men hold you down. If he has to amputate, he doesn't warn you. He just does it. No anesthesia, no mercy, just a prayer to gods who aren't listening. Sometimes they put maggots on the wound. That's not a metaphor. Actual maggots, to eat the rot. If they crawl away, you might live. If they die in the wound, so do you. You don't ask for painkillers. There aren't any. You ask for a drink. You get lukewarm wine, if you're lucky. If not, you bite down on your own tunic and scream until your voice disappears. You pass out. You wake up. You wish you hadn't. And then the real damage begins. The physical wounds you can see, you can touch, you can scream about. But the mind goes somewhere else. Somewhere the crowd doesn't see. You dream of the man you killed, not because you regret it, but because you remember how easily it happened. His face, his eyes, the sound his teeth made when your blade connected, the way he clutched his own stomach as it opened, the way he tried to speak but only spat blood. And the worst part, you liked it. Just for a moment. You liked the power. You liked the attention. You liked the silence that followed his fall. And now it won't leave you. Every night, the dreams come. Not dreams, hallucinations, flashbacks. You see the sand turning to hands. You see the helmet crawling toward you. You feel the trident in your gut, even if it never touched you. You wake up and you don't know where you are. You reach for a sword that isn't there. You swing at shadows. You scream into the night and no one comes, because they're screaming too. The ludus isn't quiet at night. It groans, it gasps, it whispers. Men weeping in their sleep, men speaking to the dead, men staring at the wall for hours, blinking like they forgot how. You stop speaking. What's the point? No one wants to talk. Not really. They might be your ally today, but your opponent tomorrow. You don't ask questions. You don't share secrets. You sit in silence and count the cracks in the wall, wondering which one you'll be buried beneath. There's no therapy. No relief. No talking it out. You cry. You get mocked. You flinch. You get tested. You break. You get replaced. And Rome doesn't care. The emperor doesn't care. The crowd doesn't care. The gods, if they're real, are laughing. You walk with a limp. You can't lift your arm above your shoulder. Your breath whistles, because something inside your chest never healed right. Your hearing is going in one ear. Your vision flickers. You think you smell rot in your own skin. Maybe it's just fear. Maybe it's your body warning you. Maybe it's the part of your brain that still remembers what it meant to be whole before they broke you into something entertaining. And yet, you keep going. Why? Because the only thing worse than fighting is not fighting. Because if you stop, if you fall, if you're no longer useful, they discard you. Not with ceremony. Not with dignity. You don't retire. You vanish. In the night. In the shadows. In a cart. In a ditch. So you train. You eat your gruel. You bind your ribs. You grind your teeth. And you get back in the sand. Not because you want to, but because you have no other option. This isn't about honor. It's not about fame. It's not even about survival anymore. It's about delay. Delay of death. Delay of decay. Delay of that final moment when the crowd decides they've had enough of you. You don't win in the arena. You persist. Until you can't. Until the price gets too high. And by then, there's nothing left of you to pay with. Glory, gold, and the illusion of freedom. So you think you made it? That you fought enough, bled enough, pleased the crowd enough to earn a life beyond the sand? You're standing there, barely breathing, bones grinding like old wood, and they hand you a wooden sword. Not to fight with, to hold, to symbolize your freedom. It's called the rudis. You grip it like a trophy. You think it means you've won. But let's not kid ourselves. The rudis isn't a reward. It's a prop, a souvenir, a joke so old no one laughs anymore. You've survived a dozen fights, maybe more. The crowd knows your name, or at least the name they gave you. Maybe it was the butcher, maybe the wolf, maybe something poetic like Shadow of the East. It doesn't matter. They chanted it. They painted it on the walls. Women whispered it. Children shouted it in the streets. Senators toasted it. You were the main event. And now, they tell you it's over. You're free, whatever that means. At first, it feels like triumph. You're invited to feasts, draped in togas, bathed in wine, hand-fed by soft hands that never held a blade. Poets compare you to Hercules. Merchants offer you coin to endorse their amphorae. Drunken nobles ask you to reenact your kills at banquets, stabbing melons while they clap like children. For a moment, you live like a god, a broken, limping, toothless god, but a god nonetheless. Gold comes. Fast. Too fast. A purse here, a villa there, trinkets, prostitutes, more wine, more flattery. But it's not gifts. It's rent for your story, your pain, your scars. And when the story stops selling, the coin dries up, because no one wants to hear about your nightmares. They want to see you at the next match. And when you don't show, they forget. The crowd always forgets. Fame in Rome is like perfume in the heat. Strong, overwhelming, then gone. You try to live like a citizen. But you're not a citizen. You're a gladiator with no master. And a man with no master. In Rome, that's a liability. You don't know how to buy land. You don't know how to do business. You don't know how to farm. You know how to kill. You know how to scream. You know how to survive in the sand. But here, on marble streets and in bathhouses and among people who've never tasted iron, you're a freak, a relic, a walking memory of violence. Some try to marry into money. Doesn't work. No noble daughter wants her children fathered by a man who was once fed to a bear for applause. Others try to join the army, but they're too wild, too scarred, too broken. They don't follow orders, they follow instincts, and instincts don't earn promotions. Some try to disappear, to leave Rome, to start again in a quiet town, far from the arenas. But you can't leave what's inside you. You still sleep with a blade. You still flinch at sudden noise. You still wake up expecting to be called to fight. You still taste blood in your mouth when you bite into bread. And when you pass a crowd, part of you wonders if they're cheering or jeering. And then there are the ones who come back, the repeaters, the fallen stars, the ones who run out of coin or hope or will, who walk back through the gates of the ludus, older, slower, but willing. Not because they want to fight, but because, at least in the arena, they knew who they were. They had a role. They had value. They were something. Someone. Even if it was just a dying thing in a painted helmet. The crowd loves a comeback. For a minute. They scream louder. Bet heavier. But they're not cheering for your resurrection. They're cheering for your final act. And this time, when the blade goes in, no one weeps. They cheer. Because you got what was coming. Because you had your time. Because you were never meant to last. So you think they all accepted their fate? That every man with a collar around his neck, a brand on his arm, and a blade in his hand simply bowed his head and died for applause? No. Some remembered who they were. Some fought back. Some chose fire over fame, blood over bread, death over silence. And one of them became a name that echoed even in the ears of the men who crushed him. Spartacus. He wasn't born to rebellion. He was born to war. A Thracian, a soldier, a barbarian by Roman standards, which meant he was exactly the kind of savage Rome liked to tame. They captured him, broke him, sold him. He was forced into the life of a gladiator, chained, trained, paraded like a beast, taught not to think, but to kill when told. and he was good at it. Too good. But he never forgot the fields he once fought for, the hills, the freedom, the cold air that didn't reek of blood and boiling wine. They gave him a sword and expected him to dance. He waited, listened, endured, and then he rebelled. It started small, a spark in Capua, just a few dozen gladiators, armed with kitchen knives and stolen training weapons. Men used to killing, but not for each other. For the crowd, for the coins, for survival. But that day, they killed for something else. They broke out, tore through their captors, took to the hills, and from there it began. The revolt, the war, the nightmare. Rome never imagined, because it wasn't just gladiators who joined. It was slaves, miners, farm hands, anyone with a shackle scar, anyone who'd ever been spit on in Latin. Thousands poured in. They came barefoot, half-starved, covered in lash marks. But they came, and they fought, not because they thought they'd win, but because they finally understood the truth. They were never men in the eyes of Rome. They were entertainment, tools, disposables. And a tool that breaks, that's dangerous. Spartacus didn't want glory. He didn't want a throne. He wanted out of Italy, out of the system, out of the rotting mouth of an empire that smiled while devouring its own. He tried to lead them north, over the Alps, home. But by then it was too late. The rebellion had become something else. It was no longer about escape. It was a symbol, a storm, a stain Rome couldn't wipe off. The Senate panicked, sent armies, generals, praetors, and the rebels crushed them, again and again. Trained soldiers slaughtered by barefoot men, wielding farming tools and looted blades. Camps overrun, banners burned, entire legions humiliated, and with every victory, the rebellion grew, not just in size, but in terror. Rome began to fear, because what if this caught on? What if every slave, in every villa, every mine, every field, realized they had numbers? What if the gladiator, the joke, the spectacle, became the spark that burned the Republic? So Rome did what it always did. It adapted. It stopped underestimating. It stopped laughing. It sent Crassus, rich, ruthless, relentless. A man who didn't care about honor or headlines, only results. He built a wall across Italy. A wall, not to keep someone out, but to keep slaves in, to box in the rebellion, to starve it. And it worked. Slowly, cruelly, brutally. The rebels began to wither. Factions split. The dream crumbled. Spartacus, knowing what came next, charged one last time. Into the storm, into the Roman blades, into death. No one found his body, because Rome didn't need it. The symbol had been shattered. And the survivors, Rome made examples. 6,000 crucified, lined up for miles along the Appian Way. Not buried, not burned, displayed, rotting, screaming without breath. A final message written in flesh. This is what happens to those who dream of freedom. But Spartacus wasn't the only one. Before him, there was Eunice, a slave in Sicily, a former fortune teller who said the gods spoke through him. He didn't just rebel, he crowned himself king, led thousands, burned cities, held Sicily for years, called it a kingdom. Rome sent armies. Many failed, but eventually they broke it, killed him, buried his kingdom under ash and chains. Then there was Salvius, another Sicilian revolt, inspired by Eunice, fierce, organized, short-lived, ended in blood, like the rest. And Athenian, another leader, another fire, another massacre. Each revolt ended the same way, not because they weren't brave, not because they weren't righteous, but because Rome was built to outlast hope. It knew how to wait, to divide, to promise and lie, to offer a taste of mercy before plunging the knife. You couldn't break Rome with courage. You had to kill its soul, and the empire had none left to lose. So yes, they rebelled, again and again. They rose from the pits, from the mines, from the arenas. They swung their chains like swords. They screamed for dignity. They begged for a day when a man could wake up and not wonder how he'd die for someone else's amusement. But Rome didn't hear them, or maybe it did, and crushed them louder. Spartacus became a myth, a hero in books, a name shouted centuries later by men who never saw the sand. But in his time, he was a threat, a scar, a reminder that even the most broken can still bleed power. The arena survived. The games went on. But something had changed. Rome never fully laughed again. Somewhere deep beneath the cheers and wine and coin, there was a whisper. What if they rise again? So you think the gladiator was just a victim, just a toy? No. He was the ghost that haunted Rome, and the chains he broke still echo. So you think death in the arena was an accident, a misstep, a bad swing? No, death wasn't a mistake. It was the point, the finale, the standing ovation. You weren't just expected to die, you were expected to die well, because your life was the setup. But your death? That was the climax. From the moment you step onto the sand, your body already knows it's over, not in thought, in sensation, in the tremble in your spine, in the way your fingertips twitch before you grip the hilt, in the way the light hits the arena, too bright, like it's trying to blind you. The drums are louder than your heartbeat. The air smells like dust, piss, oil, and old blood baking into clay. The crowd isn't even watching yet. They're still finding their seats, because everyone knows. The first minutes are foreplay. The real moment, the one they paid for, is the ending. You've been here before, fought before, bled before. Maybe you've even won before. But this time is different. You feel it. The way the Lannister looked at you this morning. The way the guard didn't make eye contact. The way your gear feels just a little cheaper. You were good. You were valuable. But not anymore. The new recruits are younger. Hungrier. You're tired. Your left leg drags. Your sword hand shakes if you hold too long. You've lived too long in the arena. And Rome has no room for old legends. Your opponent is fresh. Maybe not new, but newer than you. His eyes aren't wild. They're focused. He's been trained to kill you. Not honorably, not fairly, effectively. Because this isn't a duel. It's a script. And the ending's already been written. You circle. Trade blows. The crowd begins to notice. A gasp here. A shout there. But it's not your skill they admire. It's your desperation. You're slower than you were. He cuts your shoulder. You grunt. The crowd applauds. They love pain, especially the kind you try to hide. You land a blow, maybe two. The other man stumbles. For a heartbeat you think, maybe. But then you see the signal. The editor, the referee of this nightmare, makes a gesture. Subtle, controlled. You've served your purpose. It's time. Your opponent lunges, not with fury, with precision. A cut across your thigh, deep, deliberate. You drop to one knee. The crowd rises. The roar builds. They smell it, the ending. And now, the performance begins. Your sword falls. You reach for it. Not to fight. To finish with dignity. It's knocked away. You are now defenseless. On your knees. Covered in blood. Your blood. The other man stands above you. Breathing hard, but not panting. He's waiting. Not for you. For them. The crowd chants. Not a name, a verdict. They argue with themselves. Some want mercy, they always do, the illusion of kindness. The others, they want what they came for, a death, a real one. The emperor is watching, or a magistrate, or some pudgy noble pretending to be powerful. He raises a hand. This is the moment. Thumbs up, you live, for now. Maybe, if they still think you can entertain. Thumbs down, you die. Right here, right now. Face in the dirt. No funeral, no farewells, just applause. The thumb turns, and suddenly, silence. Not because the crowd has stopped, but because the sound fades behind the drumbeat of your own body falling apart. Your vision narrows. You don't see the sword. You feel it. The blade enters clean. They're trained for that. Usually below the sternum. Angle up, pierces the heart or lung. Quick, mostly. You gasp, not because of pain, but because your body forgets how to breathe. You fall forward, not backward. Backward is theatrical. Forward is real. The crowd erupts. They chant his name. They throw coins, flowers, crumbs. Not for you, for the victor. You twitch, once, maybe twice. Your fingers grasp the sand like it means something. It doesn't. You're no longer you. You're an ending. Two men with cloaks approach. They poke your body, just to be sure. One drags you by the ankles. The other waves to the crowd. You're pulled across the arena floor like meat across a butcher's block. Behind you, the sand turns dark. A smear, a trail, a reminder. No one weeps, no one prays, no one says your name, because the next pair is already being armed. The next act begins. Your armor is stripped, your body dumped, maybe burned, maybe buried, maybe forgotten in a ditch outside the city. If you were famous, they might paint you. Not your face, your death, your final pose, your last breath immortalized on a mosaic in some merchant's courtyard. Because that's what mattered. Not your life, not your thoughts, not your soul, only your final fight, and how loud it made the crowd scream. So you think dying in the arena was tragic? No, it was the plan. And the show must go on. So you think you know the gladiator, the sand-slick hero, the warrior with honor in his eyes and justice in his blade. You picture a lone figure standing against tyranny, one-liner on his lips, revenge in his soul, the crowd at his back and the emperor in his sights. But that isn't a gladiator. That's a myth, a fantasy sold in theaters, bound in books, painted in digital blood. The real story, that was buried beneath the sand long ago, and no one dug it up. They paved over it with a script. Hollywood gave us a gladiator we could love, a man betrayed, a man broken, a man who fought not for applause, but for vengeance, a man with a cause, a clean conscience, a poetic death. But real gladiators weren't poets. They weren't rebels. They weren't free men in disguise. They were property, collateral, inventory. Flesh bought and branded, trained not to question but to entertain. They didn't fight for ideals. They fought because they were told to. And if they refused, they were starved, whipped, mutilated, executed. No speech, no music, just pain. The movie version stands tall, clean, noble, muscles glistening, chin high, wounds that make him look rugged, not ruined. But the real man, he was scarred in ways the camera can't show. His teeth were cracked, his bones never healed right. His breath whistled through a hole in his rib cage. His fingers curled wrong from too many breaks. His eyes darted like a cornered animal, trained to see threats where none existed. He smelled like rust and fear. He didn't walk tall. He limped, dragged, endured. Glory, that wasn't real. Glory was the illusion painted over screams. No gladiator entered the arena thinking he was making history. He thought about how not to die that day. how to make the blood spray at the right angle, how to fall convincingly if the crowd seemed restless, how to kill a man he'd trained beside for 3 years because the editor needed a show. There was no music, just metal. No noble revenge, just rot, just sand and spit, and the hot stink of death on your lips. But we love the myth. We cling to it, because it makes the cruelty digestible. It turns butchery into bravery. It lets us cheer for blood without feeling complicit. It was honorable, we say. They chose it, we claim. They were heroes, we repeat. But that's the lie. The beautiful, shimmering lie that makes the whip look like discipline and the sword like freedom. Because if we admit the truth, that we built an empire on forced combat and public execution as afternoon entertainment, then we'd have to see ourselves in that crowd, cheering, pointing, demanding more. We are addicted to the fantasy, not just of gladiators, of violence in general, of suffering dressed as story, every blockbuster soaked in vengeance, every game dripping with blood. We crave it, worship it, wrap it in art and call it epic. But it's not new, it's not modern, it's Roman. It's older than bread and wine. It's in our bones, our myths, our headlines. Because deep down, we are not that different from the crowd in the Colosseum. We just changed the channel. In ancient Rome, they sat beneath the sun, sweating through linen, watching a man's head be split in two for sport. In our time, we sit in the dark, surrounded by snacks and silence, and watch the same scene rendered in pixels. The difference? Lighting, runtime, popcorn. But the urge is the same. The thirst, the gaze, the satisfaction of watching someone fall. And Spartacus? He didn't wear perfect armor. He didn't win. He didn't get a moment of quiet reflection with swelling strings in the background. He was hunted, cornered, slaughtered, and his followers were nailed to trees. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, literally, spaced every few feet for miles, rotting above the road as warnings. Their deaths weren't a message. They were maintenance, pest control for rebellion. But today, we carve him into stone. A rebel, a liberator, a freedom fighter, a man who looked like he worked out between scenes. We lift him up because the real man, the dirty, desperate, doomed version, makes us too uncomfortable. The myth is easier. The myth sells better. The myth looks good on posters, and that's the tragedy. Because what survived wasn't the man. It was the fantasy of him, the same fantasy that killed him, that demanded his suffering, that cheered as his blood painted the dust. The gladiator didn't die in the arena. He died when we forgot who he was, when we traded truth for tension, grit for glamour, chains for choreography. He died when we replaced memory with myth. So the next time you watch the hero unsheath his blade, square his shoulders, stare defiantly at a corrupt emperor, and roar into the crowd, remember, the real gladiator wasn't there to make a statement. He was there to be slaughtered. And the only thing that survived was the lie. If you made it this far, you're one of the rare ones. So do yourself a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. So you never miss what history really looked like. Not the myth, not the movie. The truth. Raw, brutal, unforgettable. You think this was intense? We're just getting started. So you've watched it all. The fights, the fire, the spectacle. You stood in the center of the Colosseum and felt the sun on your skin and the roar in your chest. You imagined the sand between your toes and the blade in your hand. You lived the legend. You tasted the myth. You told yourself, maybe, just maybe, I could have done it. Maybe I would have survived. But you're wrong. You wouldn't have lasted a day. And here's the worst part. You were never the gladiator. You were the crowd. You wouldn't have woken up in a cage. You would have paid to watch the man who did. You wouldn't have eaten the mouldy gruel or pissed in a corner. You would have dined on olives and honey while men screamed in the dirt. You wouldn't have lifted the sword. You would have lifted the cup. You would have sat shoulder to shoulder with the masses, cheering, betting, laughing, chanting for death like it was dessert. And you wouldn't have flinched, not even once, because the crowd never does. You weren't down in the dust. You were above it. You weren't bleeding. You were entertained. You weren't the one branded and bound and trained to die for someone else's moment of joy. You were the one demanding it. And if the man in the sand hesitated, if he begged, if he fought too well or not enough, you would have turned to the editor and shouted for a thumbs down. You would have thrown coins or stones or silence, which in the arena was worse than either. Because the real power didn't sit with the emperor, it sat with the people. With you, with every single hand clapping, every voice shouting, every pair of eyes glued to a life ending in high definition. The gladiator didn't die alone. He died with your approval. And if you think you would have been different, more noble, more merciful, you wouldn't. No one was. The arena didn't change people. It revealed them. It showed them what they were when shame had been removed, when blood had been made beautiful, when violence was a shared addiction, no longer punished but applauded. You wouldn't have been a hero. You would have been hungry for the next kill. You don't survive the arena by being brave. You survive it by not being in it. And that's where you've always been. In the stands, behind the wall, watching, consuming, forgetting. You want to imagine yourself holding the gladius, stepping forward, facing down the monster with fire in your eyes. Then answer this. When the crowd screams for death, do you listen? Or do you shout louder? Because the final truth is this. No one survives the arena. Not really. The gladiator dies in the sand. The crowd dies slowly, rotting in comfort, numbed by repetition, bloated on a diet of other people's suffering. And it never ended. You just gave it a new name, a new screen, a new set of rules. But the bones beneath the show are the same. You still watch. You still cheer. You still want the blood, as long as it's not yours, as long as it's stylized, packaged, fictional, as long as the pain comes with a soundtrack. You think this was about the past? This was about you. Because in the end, you weren't the man gasping in the sand. You were the one holding the wine, leaning forward and whispering, "Kill him." So would you last a day? You already have. You lasted every single day of the games, because you were never meant to fight. You were meant to watch. And now that it's over, now that the blood has dried and the sand has settled, you should ask yourself one more question. If that was the gladiator's life, what did it really mean to be a Roman slave? Because if you thought the arena was cruel, you haven't seen the villa. You haven't heard the iron chain rattle at dawn. You haven't felt your name stripped from your tongue. You haven't worked until your hands cracked open and your back bled salt. The gladiator had a weapon. The slave had nothing. But that's another horror. And it begins with a door closing behind you, chains clinking in the dark, and no one watching, not for entertainment, not even for mercy. No one watching, because no one cared. You want to know what came after the arena? If, and only if, the Emperor's thumb spared you. If you didn't die, coughing up pieces of your own lungs on the sand. If you managed to live another day. Then you limped back into the ludus, your ribs cracked, your fingers broken, your face a pulpy mask of bruises. And the next morning, they asked if you were ready to fight again. Because survival wasn't peace. It was paperwork, a note on a wax tablet. Fit for duty. That's all it took. No doctors, no questions. You could barely walk. Good. You'd die slower. That made it more exciting. And in the crowd, they didn't remember the pain. They remembered the moment. The sound of the blade striking bone. The way you collapsed. The roar. The thrill. That's what made them return. Not the names. Never the names. Only the deaths. Some gladiators became so famous that their likeness was stamped on oil lamps, gambling tokens, and walls of brothels. Not because they were admired, but because they were useful. Disposable idols. Living merchandise. You didn't own yourself, but you lit someone's hallway. That was Rome's idea of legacy. And if you lost your edge, too slow, too stiff, too sad, yes, even melancholy was punished. If you looked too human, you were removed. Quietly, silently, because no one wanted to see the aftermath. Only the action. There were also mock naval battles, the Naumachiae. They flooded entire amphitheaters just to watch prisoners drown for sport. Imagine that. An empire so wealthy, it built a sea in a stadium just to sink men in it. And you wonder why the crowd didn't care. They didn't just cheer for death. They engineered it. The myth says the gladiator was a warrior. The truth? He was a commodity. Like grain, like livestock. Bought, used, broken, replaced. No honor, no freedom. Just another way for Rome to forget the screams behind the applause. And you, sitting comfortably now, watching this on a screen, drinking water that isn't poisoned, eating food that wasn't rationed to keep you barely alive, you still believe you'd survive? You wouldn't survive a day in that heat, in those shackles, on that sand. You wouldn't survive the wait before your name was called. You wouldn't survive the infection from the smallest cut. You wouldn't survive the audience's boredom, because that's what killed more men than blades. Boredom. A crowd that looked away. A fight that wasn't flashy enough. A story that didn't thrill. And Rome never forgave boredom. They built an empire on fear, chained it in gold, and called it civilization. You don't survive Rome. You endure it, until it finishes with you. And if you still believe the arena was the worst part, you've forgotten what happened before you even got there. You weren't born a gladiator. You were made into one. You were taken, or sentenced, or sold. One moment you had a name. The next, you were property. And property doesn't get asked if it's ready. It gets dragged, stripped, shaved, branded, broken. In the ludus, they didn't train you. They rewired you. Every morning started with a whip crack. Every mistake ended in blood. You were taught to stab, not slash. To breathe through pain. To smile when your opponent screamed. They fed you like a prize pig. Not out of kindness, but investment. You were meat, dressed up for slaughter. If you lived long enough to grow muscle, they gave you a nickname, painted you in oil, and paraded you like a trophy. They called it glory. But glory is just gore with a better publicist. You think the crowd loved the gladiators? They didn't love you. They loved your death. They didn't chant your name. They chanted for spectacle. You weren't a man. You were a moment, a rush, an escape. The arena wasn't a place of honor. It was a slaughterhouse disguised as a sport, and every cheer was a knife in your spine. If you refused to fight, they whipped you. If you broke down, they drugged you. If you resisted, they threw you to animals. Not metaphorical ones, real beasts, lions, panthers, crocodiles. They starved them for days just to make sure you'd feel every bite. And if you managed to kill it, they brought another, and another, until your arms stopped lifting and your knees gave out. And then, maybe, they let you die. But there were worse fates than death. Some gladiators were kept alive long past their use. Old champions, now limping, toothless, half-blind. The crowd didn't want them anymore, so the lanista rented them out. Private parties, drunken nobles, children's birthdays. Perform, they'd say. Entertain us. You were once a lion, now you danced like a clown. And if you cried, they laughed, because nothing is funnier than watching yesterday's killer beg for dignity. That was Rome's favorite game. Raise a man high, then grind his face into the floor while everyone watched. And the women? Yes, there were female gladiators too. The gladiatresses, rare, exotic, marketed like forbidden fruit, but their blood spilled the same. Their screams were just softer. They were sexualized, humiliated, destroyed for double the pleasure. To the crowd, a woman fighting wasn't a tragedy. It was a fantasy. They didn't see her die. They saw her perform. And when she bled, they clapped harder. There were also the condemned, criminals thrown into the arena without weapons, told to survive. Sometimes they'd be dressed as mythological figures, Orpheus, Icarus, Prometheus. But there was no metaphor, just mutilation. And the audience loved it. They watched as legends were torn apart, as a man pretending to be Hercules screamed for his mother while dogs ripped him in half. This wasn't theatre. It was trauma for sport. You want to know the real horror? It worked. The games kept Rome calm, fed, distracted, while the emperors raised taxes, killed senators, poisoned brothers. The people chanted for more blood. The arena became the valve for every ounce of suppressed rage, lust, and fear. A pressure cooker of cruelty. Let them watch men die, and they'll forget they're dying too. And still, there were some who survived, who killed enough, pleased enough, obeyed enough to earn a wooden sword, the rudes. Freedom, a joke, because once the crowd had seen you bleed, they never forgot. You walked outside the gate, and still they followed. Whispers, stares. That's him. That's the one who gutted 6 men in the Forum Games. You weren't free. You were haunted. You tried to live like a man again, but your hands didn't know how to hold anything that wasn't a weapon. You closed your eyes at night and heard the roar. You flinched at sudden sounds. You drank to forget. You woke up screaming, and Rome didn't care. Rome doesn't remember the retired, just the fallen. So you want to be a gladiator? You want the thrill, the armor, the fame? Then be ready for the chains. Be ready for the loss of your name. Be ready for your blood to become applause and your death to become entertainment. Because in Rome, you didn't die once. You died every time the gate opened, every time the sand stuck to your skin, every time the crowd screamed not for survival, but for spectacle. And long after your body was broken, your image was still sold, painted on walls, etched into knives, burned into memory. You were never a man. You were content, disposable, repeatable, profitable. You were the original viral moment. And Rome knew how to milk every drop. So next time you picture yourself in that helmet, raising your sword to the sun, ask yourself, are you really the one holding the blade? Or are you just one more shadow in the crowd, screaming for someone else to bleed? If you made it this far, you're one of the rare ones. So do yourself a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss what history really looked like. Not the myth, not the movie. The truth. Raw, brutal, unforgettable. You think this was intense? We're just getting started.